Went to England and Africa and down the South Pacific and all over the place. And the audience was so sensational. And I said, how long has this been going on?
I just want you boys to see what you're fighting for, that's all.
When I think back, we had to stop at a little place to fuel up. There were 3 men on duty. And the night shift, where they were sleeping. And we got out of the plane, and the kids saw us and said, hey, and they yelled in the tent, Bob Hope and Francis Langford, and Jerry Colonna. And they all got out of bed, and they came out, and they said the natural thing to us, said, well, how about doing a show for us? So we got up in a tree stump and did an abbreviated version of our show for 6 kids, which was, to us, was one of the most exciting shows we ever did.
3 other superstars who would go anywhere, anytime, to hospitals and war zones were Patty, Maxine, and Laverne, the Andrews sisters.
Well, all right. Well, all right, then. Dig, dig, dig. Well, all right. Well, all right. Chop, chop, chop. Well, all right. Well, all right. Hi, hi, hi. Well, all right. Well, all right. Well, all right. Well, all right. Hold tight. Hold tight. Hold tight. Hold tight. Yak-a-sack. You want seafood tomorrow.
For Maxine Andrews, close harmony included the audience.
Most of the fellas accepted us as the girls next door or the kid sisters. And I think there was something about the family unity that people hung on to.
I'll be with you in apple blossom time. I'll be with you to change your name to mine.
It does something to me. I can almost get that same chill back again, and the same kind of sadness that you knew that when you were saying goodbye, that many of them weren't coming back. And it was just very hard to take. But for the time being, they were happy.
If it takes courage to be willing to die for your country in war, there's also some courage required to give birth in war. But having a baby is one way of saying you aren't afraid to invest in the future. And in that war, buying a war bond was a way of putting your money where your mouth was. The name on this war bond is Linda Jane Smith. The date is August 15th, 1944, the day she was born. The bond was a gift to a brand new baby girl, an investment in the future, and a promise from her country. The future kept its value, her country kept its promise. Me, I kept the bond to remind me. Come back to the summer of '44 and the big girls.
Our world will continue with Liberation Summer, 1944.
Welcome back to the summer of 1944. There's victory in the air. The liberation of Paris is just around the corner. Meanwhile, over here and over there, Americans continue living in the intense, skewed reality of wartime, where yesterday is always long ago, tomorrow is always far away, and everything in life is bigger than life.
The biggest morale boost, of course, for GIs overseas was mail. V-mail was an ingenious device. You wrote your letter on a special form, which was censored, then shrunk onto 16-millimeter film. One roll of film could hold 1,600 one-page letters. Another big morale builder was the pinup girl. You might carry into battle a snapshot of Mom or the girl you left behind. But the girl on the barracks wall was Betty Grable or Rita Hayworth or Esquire magazine's monthly contribution, the Varga Girl.
The pinup girl. The French postcard brought her to America. The U.S. Army took her back to France, but only to visit. She'd become a real Yankee Doodle dandy.
She's the girl they pin up in the barracks. She's the girl they pin up on the wall.
Good night, Jeannie.
Good night, Joe. Sweet dreams.
She's the chick they all pick in the service, and they take her all over the world.
Ah, Linda, if you were only here to nurse me.
Now, Freddie, they have enough trouble with your temperature as it is.
Pinup girls got to go into combat, too. They belonged there, not like reporters or performers or real girls. Certainly they weren't like the 350,000 real women who were not allowed in combat but served their country by doing more than posing for it.
First class Private Mary Brown. She wore that uniform like $1 million gown.
Captain Ruth Rosenthal of the Women's Army Corps was one of those women.
We were the woman behind the man behind the gun. And I think most of the people who started the Corps had in mind getting the men out of the offices and onto the battlefield. And that women would do things like file and type and do secretarial work, would do cooking, baking. I think when they saw how quickly the women adapted to military life and how well they did, eventually that was expanded.
By 1944, there were 85,000 WACs. The Waves, the Spars, and the Women Marines also served. At 37, Grace Hopper joined the Waves so the men could go to sea.
Gradually, we watched all of the combat men disappear into the ships, and pretty soon the shore establishment was empty. And the answer, of course, was the women. We were to substitute for the men who'd gone to sea. See, the whole attitude was that we were backing up the men. That's what we were there for. That's what we were doing. There was no time for anything but the war effort.
These women did not type. They flew airplanes for the Army. 916 women flew 60 million miles in 2 years. Impressive?
She's gone into a man's world because the men needed her. The little blonde on the right with her hair bleached by the sun, you or I might judge by other standards.
They might. She wouldn't. Nani Horton was a pilot, and she was in this to help.
The whole thing was based on the premise that we were going to need every male pilot overseas in combat.
So they taught male pilots, ferried planes, and towed targets for artillery practice. It was against the rules for women to shoot, not against the rules for women to get shot at.
Every girl was prepared to do anything, including going into combat.
It was a family. Those of us who were in the Women's Army Corps or Waves or whatever felt very close to a soldier or a sailor or a Marine. When we saw him, when he saw us, it was sort of like brother and sister. It was an enormous experience. I just remember D-Day so clearly because that was the turning point. That was the light at the end of the tunnel.
But the tunnel was long, the light was faint, and it would take more than a year to reach it. Normandy was not Nebraska. But the women of the Red Cross tried to make it as much like Nebraska as they could. They were, indeed, behind the man behind the gun, right behind him. Their clubmobiles brought coffee, donuts, and a kind word right up to the front lines. Peggy Maslin drove a clubmobile in Normandy.
The soldiers were never expecting us, and so they were always dumbfounded to find out even that we spoke English. We would serve the hot coffee very often. They hadn't had any in a long time. And the donuts. And most importantly of all, a great collection of 78 records.
They were all civilians, all volunteers, and they had to be cheerful in the face of death, whistle past the graveyard. A soldier can't feel sorry for himself.
And they were all standing around in rows very dejectedly because there was shelling across the river, and it was a nervous time for this infantry group. But we opened up the clubmobile and we served the hot coffee and the donuts.